The night was thick with anticipation. Engines roared like restless beasts, their echoes bouncing off the concrete walls of the racetrack. Fans leaned over the barriers, hearts pounding, eyes glued to the starting line. And there he was, Mark "Lightning" Callahan, a rising star in the American racing scene, sitting behind the wheel of a car that promised victory, fame, and a shot at immortality. Nobody could have predicted that in less than 3 laps, everything he had built would unravel. Callahan had been the golden boy of stock car racing. From his first dirt track at 16 to his breakout season in the regional circuits, he was a driver who could make the impossible look routine. Sponsors lined up to put their logos on his car, journalists scribbled glowing profiles, and fans painted their garages in his colors. He wasn't just racing for trophies, he was racing for legacy. But that night, under the glaring floodlights, legacy and hubris were about to collide in a way no one would forget. The stakes weren't just personal. Callahan was piloting a car equipped with a new engine that had been shrouded in secrecy. The manufacturer, an ambitious division of a Detroit powerhouse trying to reinvent itself, had poured millions into this project. Engineers promised unprecedented horsepower, insane torque, and a competitive edge that no rival could touch. On paper, it was perfection. In practice, it was a ticking time bomb. Weeks leading up to the race had been a blur of testing, late-night phone calls, and tense meetings. The engineers, brilliant but overworked, had been pushing the boundaries, desperate to deliver an engine that could restore the company's reputation after a string of disappointing seasons. They worked in whispers, guarded against leaks, afraid of journalists and rival teams alike. And Callahan, he trusted them implicitly. He believed he was holding the key to a comeback, the kind of story racing enthusiasts eat up, a driver, a dream, and a machine that could rewrite history. The first few laps felt almost cinematic. The car surged forward with astonishing speed, hugging the curves like it was alive, as if it had been built with a mind of its own. Commentators gasped at the raw performance, whispering that Callahan had something special under the hood. Fans on the stands cheered like a storm had broken over the asphalt. For a fleeting moment, it seemed that the gamble had paid off. But then it began. A sound, faint at first, almost dismissible. A high-pitched whine, cutting through the roar of the engine, almost like metal screaming against metal. Callahan felt a subtle vibration, a tiny tug at the controls that shouldn't have been there. He tried to shake it off, blaming the adrenaline, the rush of the moment. But the feeling grew, gnawing at the edges of his confidence. The car's behavior became unpredictable. Brakes hesitated, steering wobbled. And then, in the middle of turn 3 on the second lap, it happened. A violent shudder, a screech of grinding metal, and suddenly the car was sideways. Spectators froze. Cameras caught every millisecond. Callahan fought desperately to regain control, but the car was a wild thing now, no longer responding to human input. It clipped the barrier with a metallic crash, sending sparks and debris into the air. Tires shredded. Smoke rolled across the track. When the dust cleared, Callahan was sitting in the wreckage, shaken, bruised, but alive. The car, however, was destroyed. The aftermath was chaotic. Safety crews rushed in. The track was closed. Headlines the next morning screamed, "Rising star wrecked in mysterious engine failure." Social media lit up with speculation, conspiracy, and blame. Was it driver error? A mechanical failure? Or something more sinister? The engine, which had promised glory, had instead ended a career in mere minutes. Behind the scenes, the company faced a nightmare. Engineers were interrogated, prototypes dissected, and investors demanded answers. Lawsuits began to form almost immediately, with claims exceeding millions. Racing regulators threatened bans, and rival teams whispered that the company had pushed too hard, too fast, without regard for safety. Executives scrambled to contain the fallout, issuing vague statements about unexpected mechanical anomalies, but nobody bought it. In a sport where precision is everything, one catastrophic misstep could obliterate reputations. And this misstep was on a monumental scale. Callahan himself faced a different kind of battle. Beyond the physical injuries, there was the psychological toll. Confidence, the cornerstone of every champion, was shattered. Sponsors withdrew, citing concerns over future performance. Journalists, once his allies, painted him as reckless, despite the reality that he had been a victim of circumstances beyond his control. Friends tried to console him, but the truth was heavy. His career trajectory had been sliced short by a machine he had trusted. Meanwhile, whispers about the engine persisted. Some said the design had inherent flaws that were overlooked in the rush to outperform competitors. Others suggested testing data had been falsified, a dangerous gamble driven by corporate greed. Insiders hinted at meetings where safety concerns were dismissed in favor of headlines and hype. Even years later, the engine remained a subject of speculation, the blueprint buried in confidential archives, its secrets protected like a state conspiracy. The racing community debated endlessly. Some drivers refused to ever touch a car from that manufacturer again. Mechanics told horror stories of engines that would seize without warning or components that failed spectacularly under stress. Collectors coveted surviving models, not to race them, but to study them, haunted by the allure of forbidden power. And Callahan, he became a cautionary tale, a legend whispered about in garages and pits across the country. Remember lightning? Veteran drivers would say. Free laps. That's all it took. Financially, the impact was staggering. Millions had been invested in development, sponsorships, and marketing. The crash not only destroyed a car, but also a carefully constructed narrative of innovation and dominance. The company's stock wavered. Partnerships dissolved. Engineers who had dedicated years to the project found themselves unemployed. In racing, a single failure can ripple outward like a shockwave, and in this case, it swept away lives, reputations, and trust. The story took on an almost mythic quality over time. Racing enthusiasts debated what might have happened if the engine had held together. Would Callahan have won that season? Would the manufacturer have returned to the top tier of motorsports? Or was the car always a disaster waiting to happen, a beautiful promise that couldn't withstand reality? Museums displayed photographs of the wreck, journalists revisited the tale on anniversaries, and fans speculated endlessly about the 3 laps that changed everything. Yet the engine itself remained elusive. Not a single one survived unscathed. Components were scattered across private collections or shredded in secure facilities. Engineers refused to speak on record, citing non-disclosure agreements, and corporate archives remained sealed. The exact cause of the catastrophic failure was never publicly confirmed. Some say it was a flawed design, others whisper about a last-minute modification gone wrong. Whatever the truth, it was a story suspended in time, a shadow that loomed over every conversation about ambition and risk in racing. Even Callahan, years later, would occasionally glance at old race footage, fingers tracing the steering wheel in the videos, reliving the thrill and the terror. He never returned to professional racing, but he shared his experiences with young drivers, warning them about trusting machines blindly, about the seductive danger of chasing power without respect for limits. His voice, calm and measured, carried the weight of someone who had glimpsed both glory and ruin. In the end, the engine became more than just a machine. It was a symbol of ambition, of human error, of trust betrayed by metal and grease. Its story haunted the halls of racing history, whispered among mechanics, engineers, and fans alike. And somewhere, in the shadows of a forgotten Detroit workshop, the blueprint still exists. Maybe it's gathering dust, or maybe it's being studied by someone brave or foolish enough to try again. What no one knows, to this day, is whether the engine's failure was an unavoidable accident or the result of something far more deliberate. Was it a flaw buried too deep, or a warning ignored in the pursuit of glory? Some insiders hint at documents hidden away, secrets that could rewrite the story of that night and of the man who lost everything in just 3 laps. The truth, like the engine itself, remains locked away, and perhaps it always will. Mark Callahan's name is etched in racing history, not for the victories he could have claimed, but for the moment when ambition, speed, and trust collided in a spectacular, unforgettable disaster. 3 laps. That was all it took to end a career, shatter a company's ambitions, and leave a question dangling in the minds of all who watched. Could it have been prevented? Or was it destined to happen the moment someone decided to chase impossible power? The roar of engines continues on racetracks across the country. Tires scream, fans cheer, and drivers push the limits every weekend. But in the back of every mind, in every pit lane conversation, The story of those 3 laps lingers, a haunting reminder that sometimes the most dangerous machine isn't the one on the track, but the one hiding under the hood, waiting for the perfect moment to make history.